Good evening, everyone. This is your host, John Perez, your host of the Staten Island Business Podcast. And today I am here with entrepreneur, real estate expert, and Staten Island community advocate, Joe Tirone. Welcome to the show. How are you doing there today?
Hey, John. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I appreciate it.
All right. I'm looking forward to speaking to you because you are a big community advocate. You know Staten Island in and out. You know a ton about real estate, and we're going to share some of your knowledge here on today's podcast, as well as a lot of history in Staten Island. I'm looking forward to the conversation and going over that with you. So tell us a little bit about growing up in Staten Island, and what was that like for you?
Okay, sure. It was great. I got to tell you, I feel blessed that I grew up here. I'm one of the very few. There's still a certain amount of us left where my parents grew up here as well, and on my mother's side, her parents and their parents. So we go back pretty far. So I'm just going to go back to the bridge. I'm not going to go back into the Pilgrim
really
days,
that far?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I do remember when they built the bridge. Absolutely, okay. Yeah. So we would take the ferry over and then somehow end up on the Belt Parkway. I remember going to visit my aunt in Long Island, and we would watch and see,
Wow.
the towers being built, and then the connection and everything, and we all knew it was going to change, but everybody on Staten Island at the time thought it was like the best thing in the world because it was so cool that we not have to take the ferry all the time and everything. And then after that, I was a young kid, I was really young, and so I know there were some people who were against it and said it's going to change. We love being the country, and
wow, so there was some people fighting against that.
From what I understand,
really?
I don't remember
Okay.
that, but I have read about that. There were a lot of people. It was a political, almost a little bit of a fight, where I don't remember where the borough president at the time stood. I'm not 100% sure that he was really for it, but I could be wrong about that. Don't quote me on that one.
I got you. Now, how old were you around that time when the bridge was being?
The bridge was, I was about 5 or 6 years old when it was being built. And so I do remember it. I certainly remember taking the ferry, being the only place to get off of Staten Island. I remember that. And you'd go down to St. George Terminal, and your car would be on a line. And you'd be on that line for hours on a Sunday. So you'd have to get there really early because it was just one boat, after another. But even in those days, it really was not that often. So I think it was, at certain times it was every 15 minutes. On the weekends, I'm pretty sure it was every half hour. So if you were there online, you were waiting and hoping you were going to make that next boat. And if your car didn't get on, you had to wait another half hour.
Right. Now, what did Bay Street look like in those days? Was it?
Well, again, I don't remember too much, from when I was a little kid. But as I got older in high school, you still could go to Steckman's and you could shop down there. It was definitely a shopping area.
All right.
Without a doubt. But I remember, just talking about a little bit before the bridge. I remember as a kid, I used to go into what we call the woods around. I lived around Bard Avenue. So I guess it was the woods around Silver Lake Golf Course is my guess. And I used to go with a friend of mine, and we used to, even as young kids, it was such a different world, and we would explore, and we would build our little campfires, and we would find, in my memory, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, Indian arrowheads. I remember looking for them, and I think finding them. And once was a hand musket, which was really old. We found half buried, and it could have been a Revolutionary War little musket thing. I'll never know because I traded it for a Hershey bar from a kid who was older than me and a little bit smarter. So
that's probably worth a lot of money now.
I would say it could be. But
all right.
But I remember going to the mall where the mall area was when I was a kid, and they had a drive-in there. It was also an airport. So Staten Island was really very different. And as I got older, I remember driving to the South Shore. I used to go to well, it's still there, the South Shore Golf Course. There was a place called the South Shore Country Manor, I think it was called, which was, the catering part, and they used to have a band there. So me and my friends used to drive there when we were in high school. Remember, you could drive when you were 17, which I guess may be the same still now, right? And there was no West Shore Expressway, so we'd have to take the side roads, and that was in the middle of nowhere. That was in the middle of nowhere. There was just all woods everywhere. So Sleepy Hollow Inn wasn't too far away. We would go there once in a while. It was all woods around there, and park, not just parkland, private land. So very, very different. It was really very different.
So, your family goes way, way back, right? You guys owned and operated Tirone Shoe Store. Tell us a little bit about Tirone Shoe Store and who owned it and whether or not you worked there and what was it like?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, I talk a little bit about Port Richmond itself, because Port Richmond, a lot of the native Staten Islanders will reminisce. You see on Facebook, a lot of people will post something about remembering shopping on Port Richmond. And I remember it as a child. Of course, I was there because the shoe store was there, so I was there all the time. But we used to shop around Christmas time, and it was really magical. And it
really? Port Richmond?
Oh yeah,
Wow.
It was the place to shop.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, until I'm going to say recently, but that really dates me because it really wasn't so recently. All the buses used to end up somehow or go through Port Richmond because people from the city would come and actually shop on Staten Island, and they would go to Port Richmond, and perhaps maybe Bay Street as well. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I know for sure it was Port Richmond. And so all the bus routes basically went through there, and then maybe out to the South Shore from there. And I remember my uncle, my Uncle Sal is 99, just turned 99. And he still talks about how many shoe stores were there in its prime, which I don't know when that was. It was before the mall for sure, so either the 60s or the 70s.
Right.
And I think the number, and he'll get mad at me if I'm wrong, but I think it was like 12 shoe stores they had in Port Richmond.
Right.
And so it was magical place. It was like, if you picture It's a Wonderful Life, that movie, that's really what Port Richmond Avenue was like. And in the winter they had the lights, and it was very, very magical. So I was lucky to be a part of that. That was the only place we ever shopped because Tirone's was there. And then in answer to your question about Tyrone Shoe Store, they opened it in 1949.
Wow.
And but before that, my grandfather, he came at the turn of the century, so to the U.S., and he came in from Italy. And he ended up learning from his brother the trade of shoe stores. So he became, of a shoe repair. So he learned how to repair shoes, which was a very good trade to have.
Yeah.
During the Depression. Because that was one of the few places that people would go to. They had to, they had to keep their shoes, as long as they could. But he opened up a shop. He did something else in Italy. I think he was a cheese salesman, but he hated it. And I remember on Sundays he would never want us to have the cheese anywhere near him because he hated it. So that's why I'm pretty sure I'm right. He was a cheese salesman, and he had a cart. From what I remember, and so when he came here, he learned how to repair shoes. So it was a shoe repair shop for a long time. They were in different areas in Port Richmond, different storefronts. He was with his brother, closer to Richmond Terrace on Port Richmond Avenue, and then he moved eventually to where they were at 204 Richmond Avenue. And then as his children got older, my father and his two brothers, their sisters weren't interested. He decided to bring his shoe shop into the back of the store, and he put the front of the store, he made it into a shoe store. And my Uncle Sal and my uncle, who's 99, my Uncle Louis, who's now 91, they opened up the shop there. And then my father would help him out on Saturdays. Right. And so that was from 1949. So as far as back as I can remember, I remember the shoe store being there, and I remember, Port Richmond being Port Richmond. Right. So they had that for years, and then it's weird how life is, because my father would just work there on Sundays. They were never open on Sundays till the day they closed. They never opened on Sundays. That was old school for sure. And he was working at a company called, well, it's still around, Simmons Company, but it's really it's a byproduct of what Simmons Company used to be. They went through several leveraged buyouts, and one of them, he ended up losing his job in the early 1970s. So now he was unemployed. But my father, he worked 4 jobs at one time.
Wow.
To keep things, food on the table. When we owned our house, pay the mortgage and everything. And so he worked at Simmons Company full time. He sold Cutco knives, which is still around at night. And he has several stories he used to tell us about, going door to door. So I can't imagine him doing it, but he did. And then he worked in the shoe store on Saturdays. And then for about 2 years, he had this little foray where he was with one of my parents' best friends. They opened up a coffee shop. And so he invested in that with whatever little additional money that he had.
Right.
And he was like the short order cook on, I think, Sunday mornings, if I remember right. And I got to tell you, I have a lot of great things to say about my father. I really do. But he was the worst cook you have ever seen. As a kid, I remember being horrified watching him back there making eggs for somebody who was sitting at the counter. Right. And he went through egg after egg, throwing them in the garbage. I'll never forget it. So I think his friend got him away from that, and he did other stuff from cooking, but he had that for 2 years. So he had 4 jobs. So when he lost his main job, that was a big thing. And so it's amazing, the mentality, and I got to give my my father's family credit. They're all very, very close. And they said to him, well, listen, why don't you come and work with us? And because he was already there on Saturdays. And his answer was absolutely not. They're going to take food out of your, off your table, right, because you really can't afford me. The store was doing okay at that time, but not as well as it eventually. And so just unselfishly, they said, no, we're not going to hear that. You're gonna work with us. So to make room for himself, my father, they had just gotten St. Sylvester's. It was the first school, which is now closed, unfortunately.
Okay.
That they were contracted to provide the uniform shoes, and it was the one store they had. So my father decided to focus on getting more schools to get their uniform shoes at Tirone's. And I don't know what the number was, but eventually, about maybe 5 years later, they had the majority of the parochial schools getting the uniform shoes at Tirone's. And that was something they took really very seriously. I have very fond memories of when they would order the school shoes, and they would come over. I don't remember, it was in the winter at some point, and they would be ordering for the following year. And they had all their pencils and papers out and figuring out what last year and stuff, but it was always focused on quality and what was going to last. And they were really concerned about that. And Tirone's was one of the last shoe stores where you go in and you get your foot measured. So they wanted to make sure they said, well, how many narrows did we? I'll never forget it. Well, not many people have a 3 narrow, so we're not going to order too many of those. But 4 narrows, look how many we sold last year. There's a lot of 4, and they would go that, and it would be days. They'd come back, for about a week straight until they got their order right.
Now,
so
how long was the shoe store open for, and when did it close, and why did it close?
It was open for 62 years.
And 62 years. Yeah, how many businesses could say, right, they've been open, especially in the small business sector, right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Well, I'll tell you something very cool. I worked on the last day. Which was 2010, I think. And we were packed. It was like the old days, lines out the door and everything. It was a sale, but people all wanted to hang out at Tirone's or go to Tirone's. Yeah. And my last customer that was there, he was 62 years old, and he was with his mother. And his mother said that she thought that she was one of the first customers at the store.
Right.
So I said, you're the first customer and probably the last customer. What is the chance of that? It was pretty wild.
Great story. Now, in those days, it was a different type of disruption. Today, it's all types of disruption. But what do you think some of the key reasons were for closing up the shop?
Yeah, I'd offered with my father, my uncles. I said, look, I can't work in it full time, but my cousin worked there. I said, look, I'll invest in it, and I'll be involved in the shoe business. But they were like, no, absolutely not, because right at that point, their big competition initially, this was really before Amazon became Amazon, what it is today. But in the early 2000s, when they really saw that things were changing, it was really a parochial school business that was keeping them, afloat. They had opened up after my father got involved, and they were doing well with the parochial schools. They opened up 2 other stores in New Jersey. One was called Stiller's Shoe Store. They bought that. They kept the name, and Babgold's Shoe Store, and they kept that name. But they eventually closed those down in early 2000s. They opened probably around 1980, both stores, and then they ended up closing them because of the competition, which was really mostly like the department stores. Okay. Where they started to discount their shoes and bring in inferior products, but at better prices, which is more today's deal. So they couldn't really compete. So they closed those stores. They kept Tirone's because of the parochial school business. Yep. But then they saw that they were really still in business for the fact that they had the parochial school business, and they were one of the few left that did what they did. But they also owned their own building. So a lot of retail that you see on Staten Island doesn't exist anymore. A lot of it is because they couldn't afford the rents, and you see that all over really all over the country. In Manhattan, these famous restaurants are closing because they can't keep up with the rents.
Yep.
So Tirone's existed as long as they did because of the service and the product that they delivered, but also the fact that they own their own store. So that's it becomes harder and harder in this world to do that. Even here in Little Staten Island, it becomes very difficult.
Right. So let's talk about that. I mean, you think about way back what disrupted the shoe stores in those days, the department stores, and today, there's a lot of disruption happening everywhere. And when you think of Staten Island and retail and brick and mortar businesses, what do you think is the future of retail in Staten Island today?
Well, actually, there's a very bright future. It's a very different retail than from when Tyrone's was in its heyday in the 60s and 70s. It's very different. It was all mom and pop back then, and it's very, very little mom and pop right now. So you have all these franchisees that maybe have but they're pretty wealthy people. It's not, it's a family that's raising a family, with their store. But the chains are doing very well, and they really recently discovered Staten Island within the last 10 years. So you have incredible amount of retail that opened up.
Right.
Bricktown Mall down the South Shore. And you have the Boulevard, which is replacing Highland Plaza on Highland Boulevard.
Yep.
And then we're one of the few malls in the country that's enjoying an expansion as opposed to closing them down. Staten Island, the demographics are great for retail. It's we have the highest median income in the city. And they're spenders. It's blue collar. Blue collar are, for the most part, and blue collars are really they're spenders. So right now it is, you would think with all these new openings that we're at the saturation point, but they just keep opening up and they keep doing really well. Now you have the outlet mall.
Yeah, Empire Outlets.
A lot of people say, well, there's never that many people at the Empire Outlets. Doesn't look like they're doing well. My understanding is they are doing well because the people, when they go there, they do spend. So maybe it's not packed all the time, but I think that it's working well. That might not be fueled by Staten Islanders. That might be more tourists. But I think that might be a mix. Might be a healthy mix there.
Well, hopefully it'll start packing up, and I enjoy going there with my kids. Now let's talk about your role in the community. You're a huge community advocate. A lot of history of Staten Island. You've participated in a lot of community events and things happening here. How did that start? How did you get engaged in the community? And tell us a little bit about your history there.
Okay, I always wanted to get involved in the community, and from when I was a kid, because I remember my grandfather on Port Richmond Avenue, and he was very, very proud. And I remember when we moved from 204 to 164 and helping him move his shoe repair. And he was always dressed really well, and people would come over and say, "Mr. Tirone, how are you?" And he would shake everybody's hand, and they called him the mayor of Port Richmond.
Right.
And that was my grandfather Carmelo, and then my father took on that role. After that, from the 70s on until he retired. So I always had that in the Tirone blood, I guess. And then, but I was always really busy. I was in investment banking. I was married. I had three young daughters at the time. So I always said I wanted to do something, but I didn't know when I was going to actually get involved in the community. And the first thing I did was I joined the Holy Name Society at St. Teresa's Church, and I liked it. It was a nice brotherhood thing there and everything, but it was also, they were really community oriented. And that was wonderful. And obviously parish, the parish was a big thing and the church was a big thing.
Right.
So I got involved in that. I ended up, it seems that any committee I ever joined, I end up being president, so I don't know.
I know, you're president of like so many foundations.
I don't know how that happens, but I got involved. I made some changes. We lost some members, but then the changes ended up luckily being very good.
Right.
And now actually, the president who succeeded me is doing very well.
Awesome.
And the Holy Name Society in St. Teresa's is the largest and the most thriving in Staten Island. So that's what started it, and then I just moved on to I guess bigger and better things.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. We got a couple of minutes, probably about 3 minutes left in the show, but let's wrap it up with what Joe is doing today. Tell us about what's keeping you active, and you got a lot of exciting things happening, but share with our listeners, what you're doing today.
Okay, well, I guess I got really involved in the community really head on when I started advocating for the community that I had owned a property in on the East Shore of Staten Island.
What was the name of the community?
It was what we call Fox Beach in Oakwood Beach. And I led a committee there where we were advocating for buyouts. I had found out about buyouts in a meeting with the SBA at one point. I brought it to the community, not thinking that they would really be that interested, because it was a community that is, was generational. They were there. The grandparents lived across from the grandchildren.
Now, the buyouts were because of the hurricane, right?
Because of hurricane. So a buyout, what it means is that people would sell their home to the government,
right,
and they would get pre-storm value. So that's the. And to me, that was the
great.
best
Pre-storm value. Wow.
And then when the governor got involved, he added bonuses for that to participate. So in Fox Beach, we had 185 homes, and I believe the number of buyouts is in the 170s. And the people who were there, actually, there was someone just doing a study on it, and he was communicating with me. I'm still very active in that whole arena. And so he had interviewed me, and then he just called me last week and told me that the people who remained, for the most part, could not participate because of mortgage-related issues, not that they did not want to.
Right.
So we had a very high percentage there, and then a couple other communities came to me and asked to help with them, which I did. And so 3 more communities got bought out. So that became a very big part of what I do for the community, not to go out there and try to get people bought out, but that got me really to interact. So I ran for office in 2014,
Excellent.
Which I guess we can talk about another time. And because of that experience and being able to, we really moved mountains by getting that done. It was a miracle. I feel blessed to be part of it, but I have to say that that success really gave me a thirst and a desire to do more. So I'm in the middle of a lot of things we'll talk about another time.
All right. Well, I want to thank you. I mean, we probably going to have multiple part series for you to come back to the show and talk about all the other exciting things.
That would be awesome.
So thank you for coming to the show. Thank you for being our first episode and our first guest.
Very exciting. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I'm honored. I really am.
And we're looking forward to syndicating to this. Thank you, Joe, for coming to the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate it.
Right.
Okay.